Hello there. The video you're about to watch, or maybe not watch as the case may be, is one that I have ummed and ahed about whether to post at all. It's a mishmash, a stream of consciousness. I was trying to fix the throttle and gearbox control, and I just set the camera recording at certain points and filmed myself doing it, never having ever done anything like that. I'd watched a few YouTube videos about how these Morse control works, and then I started to dismantle mine and see if I could see what the problem was. And I had an idea that it might need adjustment of the cables, and someone came by on the pontoons and said, oh, you just need to adjust the cables. And I go down this red herring and that red herring and that rabbit hole, all in all trying to work out exactly what it is about my throttle setup that doesn't work. And you will see this in the video. So it's a mishmash. It's not a structured, well elocuted, it's certainly not a how-to, and the reason I have put it up is I thought it might be of use or of interest to anyone else who has a Morse style throttle and gearbox control, if only just to see how the thing looks when you take it apart. I'm certainly not presenting it as a tutorial of any kind because it is such a mishmash. Essentially, there's one problem in that the throttle cable sticks when you are returning it towards idle. It's not the idle speed of the engine that's at fault, the engine idles perfectly, but the throttle cable sticks when you try to return it to idle, and in doing so means that the gearbox will come out of gear before the throttle cable has returned to its idle position. Now in theory you could solve that by lubricating the cable, but I tried that, it didn't work, so then I end up adjusting the engine end of the cable so that the place where the cable sticks now becomes the neutral point of the cable. This may or may not all make sense later on in the video. The point is the solution was ultimately very simple, but I didn't know that at the time, so it's a bit of a mishmash. With that big caveat out the way, if you still wish to watch, obviously then do. If this is definitely not one for you, just skip it. Consider this a bit of bonus content. There is going to be another video coming along very soon. In fact, the next video will be my first cruise on the boat after I had done this throttle fix, where it all proves to have worked. Anyway, there we go. Intro over. Here's the video. My task now is to have a look at this engine control. Like most of these things, it's very simple. You pull that up to release a lock, and then it goes forwards into gear, and then the more you push it forwards, the more throttle you get. And the same with if you want to go backwards, just push it backwards, gear and then throttle. However, and that's supposed to be the order, gear first with the engine at tick over, and then you push further and you get some throttle. However, what I found driving this to the fuel dock the other day was that as soon as you went into gear, you were also getting more throttle than you needed, and if you tried to pull it back to throttle the engine into tick over, the engine dropped out of gear. And it's all just two control linkages on two different things coming off this arm, one for throttle, one for gear, and they may need to be adjusted either in this or down below my feet where they actually connect to the engine. You can see there's one control cable here which goes down to the gearbox, and it's a little bit difficult to see, hang on, but it literally pushes and pulls the control of the gearbox into forward and reverse. And then on the other side of the engine you've got this one which goes up there and pulls the throttle. So what I'm going to do initially is just push and pull that control lever and just see how the cables are working in relation to each other, because it should be gearbox first, throttle second. I've just spent a few minutes moving the lever and watching how that gearbox cable engages and how the throttle engages, and they're just fractionally out in that the gearbox has the minutest amount of travel still to go when it's in its what should be engaged position. Meanwhile, the throttle cable starts moving a fraction too soon, and moreover doesn't return to its fully neutral when you put the lever back until you put the lever back to upright. This should reveal the back of the control. And a lot of spiders. Ah! But look, we do have the back of... Oh, it's very spidery. So this is the inside of the Morse control. You've got the two control wires coming in. They each go to a separate lever, which is designed to move slightly differently at times to each other. I wonder if I can just move that to that or something. Where's the little detente where the gearbox should be engaged? I can't quite find it. There's supposed to be a little position where the gearbox would be engaged. No, wait, that's the throttle. There we go. Pull the throttle. Yeah, look, it's so that's the gearbox. That's the throttle. You start with gearbox going, but in fact you can see the throttle goes first, but it only moves round a bit. Then the gearbox pulls, and then once the gearbox is fully engaged, in theory there-ish, yes, that's gearbox engaged, then you keep pushing and you get more throttle. But in fact, we're getting a little bit of travel on the throttle while the gearbox is engaging. Now, of course, that is going to turn, so that is going to start pulling out. Hence why it has this thing to take up the slack to not allow that to pull until you've got to that point. Once you get to that point, isn't this clever? Once it's got to that point, that won't go any further, so then as you keep turning, then it does pull the cable. But there's still some travel on the gearbox when that happens. Oh, this is fascinating. This is so clever. This throttle cable, it's behaving correctly when you go into gear and forwards. It doesn't start throttling until this has fully travelled, then it starts pulling the cable. But as you push it back, when you're trying to throttle back into idle for, say, passing some narrowboats, this thing starts travelling back before the cable has fully pushed itself in and idled the throttle. Now, whether that's simply a lubrication issue, or whether if I adjust this travel it'll fix it, I don't know. That's fully throttle off, but by that point the gearbox has started disengaging. What you want is the throttle to be able to go back to tick over before the gearbox disengages. These are both held on with a split pin underneath, which I should be able to get out with pliers, and then take that bit off, whiz it round on the threaded bit and change the amount that these cables are operating at. I just need to adjust that throttle cable by a couple of turns and then try it again, and it should be better. I'm pretty sure those cables need a bit of grease as well, and I'm not sure what sort of grease to put on them, so I'll do that at a future date. But let's give that a couple of turns if I can and see how we get on. Throttle, 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 throttle off, throttle off. But it's still going to start sliding back before it should, because there's just friction in the system that starts sliding it, which stops it throttling off. Well, I've tweaked it, so I'm going to switch the engine on, and whilst the boat is still tied to the pontoon, just give it a very gentle test. You're not supposed to put it in gear while you're tied to pontoons and things, but I think just for the purposes of testing how it reacts, I think I'll get away with it. Yeah. See, I want to be able to tick over at that speed. I'm out of gear now, it's still running too fast. So I can't stay in gear at that speed, which is the tick over speed. I have a feeling that having selected the correct position on the gearbox end, I now need to get down in there. There's a couple of nuts holding that end of the throttle cable on. Take them off, adjust it so that it's fully off at that point, and then put it back on again. Just out of interest, look how much that's worn away over 21 years of use. It's supposed to be a cylinder. and years of it moving has practically cut the whole side of that out. So regardless of anything, I need a new one of those. I mean, it'll hold for a bit, but eventually that would shear off. You wouldn't want that happening on the river. Good grief. Having farted around with that for far too long, but it's given me a good understanding of it, I am now absolutely certain that fixing that is not an issue of the cable lengths. Yes, you can adjust them all you like, but you're coming up against the fundamental fact that when you put the throttle back towards neutral, the friction within the cable sheathing and the spring resistance within the mechanism is insufficient to let the cable go fully back in before the control knob has also started pulling the gearbox control. Now, if the spring was pushing with more force, it would hold the outer sheath against the compressing inner bit so that it would shut the throttle off. But it's not. Equally, perhaps if there was some lubrication down there, it would slide more easily. And, I mean, that's an easy fix. I've got some lovely penetrating 3-in-1 oil back at home, unfortunately not with me. And if I squirt some of that down there, not WD-40, actual oil, lubricating oil, down the throttle cables, you are supposed to lubricate them every now and again, it might go back in more easily before the gearbox cable is engaged. And I've tried tweaking the lengths. If you tweak the length any further, the stiffness still stops it going in before the gearbox engages, and you end up then actually unable, as I predicted, unable to put the whole throttle lever back to neutral because you've reached the end of the travel on the throttle. So it's a question of lubrication between the outer and inner sheath and the spring resistance. I'm not sure how you get the spring out, but it must be feasible. But the first thing I will try then, next time I'm here, is some 3-in-1 oil. Phew! Well, that was a long day. It is about 3 weeks, I think, since I was last here, and I have armed myself for the task of fixing up this throttle body. I have bought, ooh, hello, it's very slippery, some silicone lubricant, which I'm assured is good stuff for throttle cables. I've also got some 3-in-1 multi-purpose penetrating oil, which I have found does good works. I have also bought brand new brass knobbly things. I believe they are called trunnions. That may or may not be correct, but that's what Google told me, to replace the ones that were so worn out. So first things first, let's remove the pin. There we go, that's defunct. And means that should be able to come out. Except it doesn't want to, of course, but it will. Ow! Yes, very worn out, that one. Let's put a new one on the end. Look at the difference between how worn that one is and how that one is. Right, a little bit of messing around, and it turns out these ones won't fit through this hole. They are fractionally larger than the old ones. Well, I think all I can do is clean up these connections, squirt the grease on and put the old things back on, and then when I come over next time, bring a drill or some sandpaper or something and just eke out that hole to make it a tiny bit bigger, because these definitely will not go in by the tiniest amount you can imagine. Bring it to full throttle and squirt some grease down it. And also put these two back in their bag so I don't lose them. After a lot of twatting about with the controls where the throttle lever is, and then delving into the engine at the end where the throttle control attaches to the engine, I think I've sorted it. And it did need an adjustment at the engine end. It's a funny arrangement because you've got the end of the cable which bolts onto the throttle lever of the engine, but it bolts on with a little pivot with a spring on it, which is obviously there to provide some flex as you throttle on and off. But it was meaning that it just wasn't quite going back to neutral as you pushed the lever back. Anyway, I've moved that up. There's 2 notches in the throttle control on the engine, 2 holes through which you can bolt it. I've moved it to the upper hole and also twizzled the attachment bit so it's further along. And now it's not quite perfect, but I just ran the engine and I could have it in gear but running with the engine at idle revs. Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. In gear, but at idle revs, which is what I was trying to do. Before, it wouldn't go in gear at idle. It was always slightly faster. Now it will be in gear at idle. It's a little too late in the day to take it for a spin around the marina to double check, but I will do that tomorrow.